Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. And let's keep Week 19 going with today's Third Age Thursday. Now, that's a time for us to revisit the familiar and not so familiar stories of the Third Age. Today, we are returning again to Appendix A3 and more on Durin's folk. Now, when we were here last week, Dáin Ironfoot had just slain Azog, the mighty orc who had himself taken the life of Thror, not to mention Dain's father, Nain. When at last the battle was won, the dwarves that were left gathered in Azanul-Bazar. They took the head of Azog and thrust into its mouth the purse of small money, and then they set it on a stake. But no feast nor song was there that night, for their dead were beyond the count of grief. Barely half of their number, it is said, could still stand or had hope of healing. Nonetheless, in the morning, Thrain stood before them. He had one eye blinded beyond cure, and he was halt with a leg wound. But he said, "Good, we have the victory. Khazad-dûm is ours." But they answered, "Durin's heir you may be, but even with one eye you should see clearer. We fought this war for vengeance, and vengeance we have taken. But it is not sweet. If this is victory, then our hands are too small to hold it." And those who were not of Durin's folk said also, "Khazad-dûm was not our father's house. What is it to us unless a hope of treasure? But now, if we must go without the rewards and the were-guilds that are owed to us, the sooner we return to our own lands, the better pleased we shall be." Then Thrain turned to Dáin and said, "But surely my own kin will not desert me." "No," said Dáin. "You are the father of our folk, and we have bled for you, and will again. But we will not enter Khazad-dûm. You will not enter Khazad-dûm. Only I have looked through the shadow of the gate. Beyond the shadow, it waits for you still. Durin's bane. The world must change, and some other power than ours must come before Durin's folk walk again in Moria." So it was that after Azanul-Bazar, the dwarves dispersed again. But first, with great labor, they stripped all their dead, so that orcs should not come and win there a store of weapons and mail. It is said that every dwarf that went from that battlefield was bowed under a heavy burden. Then they built many pyres and burned all the bodies of their kin. There was a great felling of trees in the valley, which remained bare ever after, and the reek of the burning was seen in Lorien. When the dreadful fires were in ashes, the allies went away to their own countries, and Dáin Ironfoot led his father's people back to the Iron Hills. Then, standing by the great stake, Thrain said to Thorin Oakenshield, "Some would think this head dearly bought. At least we have given our kingdom for it. Will you come with me back to the Anvil? Or will you beg your bread at proud doors?" "To the Anvil," answered Thorin. "The hammer will at least keep the arms strong, until they can wield sharper tools again." So Thrain and Thorin, with what remained of their following, among whom were Balin and Glóin, returned to Dunland, and soon afterwards they removed and wandered in Eriador, until at last they made a home in exile in the east of the Ered Luin, beyond the Lune. Of iron were most of the things that they forged in those days, but they prospered after a fashion, and their numbers slowly increased. But as Thror had said, the ring needed gold to breed gold, and of that, or any other precious metal, they had little or none. Of this ring something may be said here. It was believed by the dwarves of Durin's folk to be the first of the 7 that was forged, and they say that it was given to the king of Khazad-dûm, Durin III, by the elven smiths themselves, and not by Sauron, though doubtless his evil power was on it, since he had aided in the forging of all the 7. But the possessors of the ring did not display it or speak of it, and they seldom surrendered it until near death, so that others did not know for certain where it was bestowed. Some thought that it had remained in Khazad-dûm, in the secret tombs of the kings, if they had not been discovered and plundered. But among the kindred of Durin's heir it was believed, wrongly, that Thror had worn it when he rashly returned there. What then had become of it they did not know. It was not found on the body of Azog. Nonetheless, it may well be, as the dwarves now believe, that Sauron by his arts had discovered who had this ring, the last to remain free, and that the singular misfortunes of the heirs of Durin were largely due to his malice. For the dwarves had proved untamable by this means. The only power over them that the rings wielded was to inflame their hearts with a greed of gold and precious things, so that if they lacked them, all other good things seemed profitless, and they were filled with wrath and desire for vengeance on all who deprived them. But they were made from their beginning of a kind to resist most steadfastly any domination. Though they could be slain or broken, they could not be reduced to shadows enslaved to another will. And for the same reason, their lives were not affected by any ring to live either longer or shorter because of it. All the more did Sauron hate the possessors and desire to dispossess them. The dwarves of Durin's house win a Pyrrhic victory. The other houses who came want recompense for their losses, but it won't be coming. Khazad-dûm isn't a store of treasure. It is truly Moria now, meaning dark pit. And Dáin knows that Durin's bane awaits anyone who ventures in. In fact, it will be about 200 years later before Balin leads the next attempt to settle Moria for the dwarves. And we all know how that ended. And this is also where we learn how Thorin and his folk ended up in the Ered Luin, after returning to Dunland and wandering Eriador for a time. We also learn what the dwarves believed about the ring that had been given to Durin III by the elven smiths themselves, they say, and not by Sauron. And yet, as I talked about on a very recent Mailbag Monday, that conflicts with the other evidence that suggests Sauron took all the seven from Celebrimbor after torturing him. Still, one can hope. What does remain true, though, is that the dwarves could not be dominated by Sauron via the rings. Yes, their greed could be enhanced, their lust for gold and vengeance exaggerated and turned to evil purpose. But they would not wither and become wraiths, nor would they do Sauron's will. Better than men can say, that's for sure. For now, though, that wraps it up for this week's Third Age Thursday. Come back next week as we continue the story of Durin's folk in the appendices. Now, please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, a monthly hangout with me, a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. And please join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as I welcome another special guest for Fandom Friday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps and follow at Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.